Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, 5 Ways to Elevate Leadership Development with Imbox Simulations. I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Capsim. Transform business skills with proven simulation and assessment technology. Capsim provides immersive, hands-on learning experiences in a real-world environment, so you can measure and develop the essential skills tomorrow's business leaders need to succeed. I'm Jess Thompson, Content Manager for Learning and Development at ATD, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Matt Schell. Matt Schell is Senior Business Development Manager at Capsim Management Simulations. Matt has worked with organizations worldwide to hire, develop, and retain quality talent. He's also worked with small firms and Fortune 500 companies to create custom solutions that identify skill gaps. And now, without further ado, Matt Schell.
Thank you very much, Jess. And let me go ahead and start here by sharing my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Excellent. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast. My name again is Matthew Schell. I'm Senior Business Development Manager here at Capsim Management Simulations. And it's great to again collaborate with ATD on today's webcast. And we have quite the session for you today, because I am excited to share with you all 5 ways that you can elevate your leadership development training with Imbox simulations. And the way that I'm going to do that is by showing you some practical real-world success stories. And by the end of today's session, you'll be able to see firsthand how these immersive, easy-to-use experiences have helped organizations, both large and small, develop their most important resource, being, of course, their people. But before we jump in, let's just take a quick look at the agenda of what we'll be covering today. So, to start off, I'll share with you all the key takeaways of today's session, and then we'll briefly describe who we are here at Capsim. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and jump right into a look at the current training environments with a particular emphasis on the importance of soft skills in leadership development. And we'll explore a couple ways why we can sometimes hit snags when we try to develop these key skills, and we'll examine some of our current methods briefly. And then after that, I'd like to introduce you all to the way forward with these new experiential assessment technologies we call Imbox simulations. And we'll have some fun interactive moments throughout where you can see how these work firsthand. But from there, very excited to share with you all 5 different success stories from the companies you see here on screen that have benefited from Imbox simulations in a variety of forms, including everything from skill gap analysis to being able to empirically measure the impacts of their training initiatives. And then, of course, as we near the end of today's session, we're actually going to share with you all a way where you could try these simulations risk-free to see how they work. And of course, we'll save roughly 10 to 15 minutes towards the end for any questions. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. By first, of course, speaking to the goal of today's session, the main takeaway, if you will. Well, my goal here at Capsim is to help training and development professionals such as yourselves with developing your learners by identifying and building on their core strengths, but also prioritizing skill development where it's needed most. And the way that we'll demonstrate that today is through these immersive custom assessment tools that mirror a day on the job at your unique company and provide you with empirical data on skill development to objectively assess soft skills, measure your training impacts, and streamline succession planning at your organization. So, for the next 40 minutes, my goal is to get you to believe that these Imbox simulations, these small, bite-sized experiences, are key to elevating and evaluating the effectiveness of your leaders. And I'm going to show you how these solutions can make it simple for you to achieve that by showing you how other major companies have already done so. But you may be thinking, of course, why us at Capsim? How are we qualified to speak to the topic of leadership development? Well, the answer is pretty straightforward. This is what we've been doing for well over 35 years at this point. And as a global leader in simulation-based trainings, we've assisted companies of all different sizes, small shops to Fortune 50 companies with developing both business acumen as well as strategic thinking in their leaders. But what I would say is the main differentiator for Capsim against other simulation training companies is that we've also been a leader in the assessment arena as well, going back to about 2006. And really the primary way that we've assisted our clients with this is through these objective and authentic sim-based assessments that have helped them to identify emerging leaders within their company so they could put those individuals on the fast track for leadership development. And really, it's this infusion of the science-backed approach of experiential learning that simulations do so well with, and combining that with these valid assessment techniques that has really led to many of our clients' success, some of which you see on screen and one of which we'll cover today. And really, to kick things off, I'd love for you all to just take part in a quick example on how simulations can assess these soft skills that are typically hard to measure. And what I'd like to do now is pose the following scenario to you all that I'm sure all of you can relate to, and perhaps some of you have even directly experienced. I want you to imagine that you received the following email from one of your direct reports. So in this case, we have an email from marketing associate Brennan Tangen. It says, "Thank you again for choosing me as the recipient of the Service Excellence Award. It means so much to me. Working here for the past year has been incredibly exciting. But I also want to let you know that I really appreciate the positive feedback on my job performance during our last one-on-one meeting. We had also talked about me taking on more responsibility. Well, this morning, Sanjay told me that we might have a chance to expand our business to a large and distinguished client. And I know I haven't done presentations for a client this big yet, but I'd love the chance to tackle this challenge. Let me know what you think." So, a pretty innocuous email. Something that I'm sure we've all had some degree of exposure to, but what do you exactly do here? It's not exactly one of the key things we're trained on in terms of how to communicate, right? Well, let's take a look at the options here. Do we A, go allow Brennan to attend the presentation in order to learn the ropes? B, explain that this is simply too big of an opportunity for somebody without more experience? Or C, do we ask him to create a first draft of the presentation to give to the team for feedback? So I'd love to get all of your opinion for this. If you'd like to simply enter A, B, or C into the chat, what would you all do? Okay, getting some good results here. And while we're having those results come in, when we're thinking about the effectiveness of how to handle these sort of situations, we want to, of course, look at the research of IO psychology and how to best manage our organizations to bring out the most in our people. So all of this, of course, rooted in scientific inquiry and research, what we'll be hitting on today. But as I'm seeing from the chat, we do certainly have a consensus around option C. And I would agree with you. I would say that in this case, option C would be the most effective response, but that's not to say that the other two are invalid. They just may not be as effective based on what we're focusing on today. And the reason option C, I would say, is the most effective is because it puts Brennan at the forefront of leading by example, right? By building this first draft, Brennan will have involvement in the process and ultimately is tied to the end result, especially if their efforts are ultimately successful. And at the same time, he's getting the feedback he's so eager to receive, and he's showing that initiative. And the reason I always like to open with this email is because it demonstrates that it's these small, subtle ways that we communicate, the way that we problem solve and work as a team, that can really lead to larger impacts in an organization. And this is particularly relevant in today's atmosphere where we're much more digitalized, and in many cases in an entirely remote atmosphere, where digital correspondence is quickly becoming the primary way that we communicate. And what I'd like to do now is expand on that a little bit by looking at why soft skills are so relevant in the current environment and with leadership development. And of course, the answer here is pretty obvious. It's that developing soft skills in your company, particularly in leadership roles, is absolutely critical because your people are your greatest resource. And not only are they representing your company, but they're instrumental to your strategy as well. And what makes this so true is that soft skills determine how your leaders and people not just perform on the job, but how they collaborate with their colleagues, how they interact with customers. And as we mentioned, this has only been compounded by the increase in virtual work. But having effective soft skills essentially gives your learners, your colleagues, this career durability, right? Where they can more easily acquire the skills and the knowledge and eventually the mindset needed to be an engaged and productive member of your team. And really to illustrate this, let's think about it in practical terms with communication, right? The quality of communication directly impacts relationships, which in turn determines the quality of your organization. It's having genuine, compassionate, adept conversations that enhance the connection between your employees and results in the creation of a very healthy company culture. And as a result of that, an organization capable of successfully executing and reaching its goals. But this is just kind of, our perspective here at Capsim, what we've learned from working with our clients over the past 3 decades. But let's take a look at how companies feel at large when it comes to soft skills. Well, it's not exactly an earth-shattering discovery to find out that soft skill development continues to be one of, if not the top priority of many companies out there right now. And it's a reality that most people, I'm sure most of you, are very much in tune with. Is this employee dependable? Do they work in teams well? Are they flexible? Can they problem solve? And honestly, this has been a trend for some time. I mean, you can go back and look at Bloomberg job skills reports from 7 years ago, or a LinkedIn learning report from released a couple of weeks ago. And they always indicate that the most sought after, yet least common skills that they're finding are always things like communication and teamwork. But I would say what's the new element here is that companies are now even saying that having effective soft skills is now just as important, if not more important, than technical knowledge. In fact, LinkedIn's 2019 learning report found that 92% of hiring and training professionals say soft skills matter now more than hard skills. And to take it a step further, it's noted that 63% of organizations in that same learning report are willing to hire somebody with transferable soft skills and train them up to full proficiency rather than putting the onus on technical knowledge alone or primarily. And well, why is that? Well, it's safe to assume that many companies out there feel fairly confident in their ability to develop hard skills or technical knowledge, or think of it as industry or company specific knowledge, right? But assessing and developing soft skills is a bit more tricky. And the reason is pretty easy to describe. It's that knowledge-based learning for technical knowledge and skills-based learning are 2 entirely separate things, mainly because when it comes to soft skills, they're inherently behavioral, meaning you have to actually apply them to see how well you do with things like communication or organizing or problem solving. So it's pretty clear at this point that we're all pretty much on the same page of the heightened focus on soft skill development. But what we need to look at is the effectiveness of our methods as well. Why exactly do we struggle here? Well, let's start by taking a look from the learner perspective, where Gartner found that 70% of employees say that they don't have the proficiency or the mastery of the skills needed to do their jobs. And well, we'd say, why is that? Well, it appears that there may be a knowing doing gap going on between how we're training and the application of what they're learning and training. And it's actually leans right into this stat. We find that only 12% of employees say that they apply new skills learned from L&D initiatives into their day-to-day jobs. So we can kind of recognize that this concern is shared equally with employees, is what we're seeing on our side, and that we really need to examine why the learning transfer of our training is so low. But we looked at it from the learner perspective. What about from the manager perspective? Well, what we're finding is that only 25% of managers believe that there's a positive and measurable improvement of performance post-training, which hints that not just that there's a gap in applying training concepts, but also the ability to effectively measure its impact as well. So long story short, our current methods are coming up a bit short. And what I'd like to do now is share with you kind of the 3 most common challenges that we've identified that make assessing soft skills so difficult. And really the first challenge starts with the fact that if you're going to be able to assess soft skills effectively, you need to provide relevant real-world situations where your learners can practically apply their knowledge. And the reason behind that is that just like everything else, training is susceptible to the forgetting curve, in that if they're not actively applying it, they're not going to retain that knowledge. It's common sense, but it's critical to understand here. But it goes beyond just this use it or lose it style mentality, because context is equally key to success with training, right? And that your learners need to be applying knowledge in the context of the role and the tasks that they perform on a daily basis. And typically this has been done with on-the-job training, or say, for instance, sitting in on calls, job shadowing, and so on to learn how to effectively communicate both internally and externally. And while this is successful, well, on-the-job training can also be both time and resource intensive. So efficiency is something that we need to consider here as well. But at the end of the day, it's the lack of relevance to their day-to-day tasks that make methods like, say, click-through training modules or knowledge check style assessments so impractical. But this real-world application of skills is only part of the equation here, because even if you achieve this part, you also need to consider the accuracy of how you're measuring these soft skills as well. Which brings us, of course, to our second challenge, in that you can't improve what you can't measure. So you need to ensure that you're accurately assessing one's proficiency with soft skills. And this is, again, very important because while assessment is, a key part of the process, the ultimate goal is, of course, development, right? That's your overall goal. And if you want to measure development over time, well, you need to make sure you're accurately assessing capabilities from the get-go. That way you know where you start. And let's just quickly explore why some of the current methods we're using aren't cutting it, starting with self-assessments, for example, where you have employees determine their own skill gaps based on their own job knowledge. Well, it turns out it's just not accurate, with the main downside being that, an employee may knowingly misrepresent their skills to appear more valuable, or maybe even unknowingly, right? Where we have phenomena like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we as humans do have a tendency to overestimate our capabilities. Confidence is great, but we do need to watch out for that. And as a second example, behavioral questions. They're not necessarily predictive of on-the-job performance. And this kind of harks back to a point we just made earlier, that we need to understand that soft skills are inherently behavioral, meaning you need to see them in action in a way that questions or prompts, simply can't do that. You need to actually see it being done, see them applying that knowledge. And really, what these points demonstrate is that in order to assess skills accurately, you need a solution that's more standardized, that's immersive, going back to challenge 1, but also objective in its approach. But again, accurately assessing skills is only part of the puzzle. In order to development to take place after the assessment, you need to ensure that you're providing quality feedback to your learners as well. Which brings us right to challenge 3, in that you want to provide that accurate quality feedback so you can effectively improve areas that are in need for development. And again, this is very much common sense, right? But what's important to note here is that you need to overcome those first 2 challenges related to kind of the practicality and accuracy to really make this final part work. Because there's kind of this cyclical nature we get into, where if we're not adequately finding the skill gaps, how do we know that we're efficiently fixing them? And if we're not starting in a good place with finding them and we try to fix them, well, then odds are we're not going to do the best job at that. And then we're back to square one. So in short, in order to provide quality feedback, you need to have data-driven solutions that can provide that empirical metric for you to see where an individual could, say, stand against their peers or at the world at large. That way you have a baseline of where they're currently at with soft skills. And this feedback definitely needs to be at the individual level, available instantaneously and actionable. So that way, when you do track development over time, you know where the skills were at then, where they're at now, and then that way you can compare them to the future. And while there's plenty of training assessment tools out there, with several that provide really great data, a lot of companies fall short by picking a solution that's, takes a little bit more of a generic one-size-fits-all approach without that individualized feedback component. And the reason I stress this is because, it's critical because your company is unique. Therefore, the skills and competencies that matter to you are unique. And therefore, your training should be there as well. And to kind of summarize this, we need to train the right people on the right skills in the right way. And interestingly enough, if you look at the literature, the very challenges we just described are exactly what we need to make skill development effective. So number 1, we need to provide an engaging and authentic experience for learners to apply their knowledge. 2, we need to assess both knowing and doing in learners accurately. And then we need to provide quality feedback that's immediate, objective, and actionable. And really the best way I can kind of contextualize this is thinking of it in the context of a sport, right? If I want to improve someone's golf game, for instance, I could have them describe to me what they're doing, and then I could try to provide some suggestions, but is that truly effective? Well, no. If I really wanted it to be effective, I would take them to the closest course, put them on the green, observe them taking a few shots, and provide insight into their strengths and weaknesses, and then offer some guidance on how they can improve from that point forward. And business skills, soft skills, they're no different. And whether you're focusing on soft skill assessment within your company or development or even both, it's here where I'd like to really show you how inbox simulations can really deliver on all of these points we've just mentioned. But so what exactly is an inbox simulation? Well, the best way to describe this is as a simulated experience where we put learners in a day on the job scenario where they can put their soft skills to the test by navigating the very situations they experience as a part of their job every day. And what's equally important, and as the name suggests with inbox simulations, I mean, this is mirroring the email platforms that virtually all of us use from day to day. So it's instantly relatable. And what this allows for is a very straightforward and intuitive experience because it directly addresses one of the challenges we just discussed, in that they're applying their knowledge in this real world context that reflects their daily roles and tasks. And the way that it works is quite simple. They simply jump into the simulation experience where they'll review and respond to a variety of emails from both internal and external stakeholders. They can investigate by looking at supporting documentation or even other communications. And then they make a couple key decisions via, say, multiple choice responses, multi-answer responses, or my personal favorite, where they actually write out written responses so you can explore the nuances of their decision-making process. How do they justify a given decision, for example? And as they respond, this is where the simulation component really comes in, is that they can see the consequences of their actions in real time, whether it's positive or negative, through this dynamic style experience. And after all of the emails have been responded to, they're prompted to, of course, exit the experience. And both the learner and the administrator can receive the results in real time to help identify, again, those key strengths and the areas in most need for improvement. And what inbox simulations have essentially allowed us to do is combine the validity of assessments that have been among the best predictors of managerial potential and on-the-job performance with the more science-backed experiential learning approach that, again, simulations are known for. But this time around, with a level of customization that has to this point been unattainable to many that want a more unique and immersive experience as part of their training initiatives. But how exactly do inbox sims account for some of the other challenges we hit on, and why are they the way forward to assess and develop soft skills and leadership? Well, again, they allow us to focus on developing the right people with the right skills in the right way. And what this is it's first done by allowing us to see how leadership potential, who has leadership potential, via an accurate and kind of more standardized way to assess soft skills throughout your organization. And therefore, you're able to see firsthand not just the skills of your current leaders, but also discover the potential for emerging leaders in your organization as well. And then again, inbox simulations are going to provide you with this empirical, comparative, kind of percentile-based data. That way you know exactly where their skills at now, kind of like a snapshot in time, where they need to develop to get, and then where they need to develop to get to that next stage in their career. And kind of leading to this final point here is that, that we're kind of doing this by assessing two key skill areas. We're focusing on conceptual skills like critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making. But at the same time, we're also looking at interpersonal skills as well, like communication and collaboration, all of which, of course, are really key to being an effective leader in any organization. But now what I'm excited to do is to show you this in the context of another practical example that I have for you here. So happy to get some input here as well. And what I'd like to do here is show you an example from an inbox simulation we created for healthcare administrators, where you take the role of a vice president of operations at a fictional hospital. And what we were looking to assess here was one's delegation, leadership, problem solving, and prioritization skills. And in fact, this particular example on screen is actually a more serious situation in that simulation, where it turns out medical tools were not properly sterilized prior to a surgery. And while there was no complications with the patient just yet, the hospital, of course, needs to respond. And so what I'd like to do for all of you is just like our first example is pose a question to you all. What would you do in this scenario? Would you A, schedule a root cause meeting immediately? B, tell Jane, thank you, just let me know when you need me. Or C, reply to Jane that we need to notify the family right away. So just like before in the chat, A, B, or C, what would you do in this scenario? And then we'll actually debrief this in just a moment. And while you're submitting your responses here, this is just another great example of how throughout an inbox simulation, you're interacting with these more dynamic characters and scenarios through, and again, being able to practically apply your skills. Okay, seeing a lot of responses come in here, a lot of A's, a lot of C's, some prioritizing A before C, totally get that. Well, let's go ahead and debrief this example. So in this particular example, I would agree with saying option A is the most effective response. In this case, you would earn the most points across the skills that I mentioned, like delegation and so on. Now with option B, you kind of lose points here. And we could see from the chat as well, you're kind of phoning it in here. You need to be a little bit more actionable, right? Now option C would indeed still be an effective response. So you'll receive some points, but it's not as effective as option A. And as I'm sure many of you thought of the same thing, is that at this point, the priority in this scenario is to gather as much information as possible. Notifying the family will almost certainly be a step in an effective response to this situation, but you want to enter that conversation with as much information as you can. And why I like showing this example as well is because it shows something that inbox simulations do a great job of. It's nuanced assessment, right? Because in the real world, as all of you know, our actions are rarely just correct, incorrect, true, or false, right? There's varying degrees of effectiveness in our decisions, and Inbox has the ability to mirror that in this style of assessment. But let's actually go one level deeper to show you what's going on behind the scenes further. Because there is one more real world point to emphasize here, is that how you respond to situations in inbox simulations can have cascading or branching effects. Again, you're seeing the consequences of your actions in real time, positive or negative. So just like how I would respond to an email this morning, and that could determine, how I have subsequent interactions throughout the rest of my day, this is true for an inbox as well. So in this example, if you chose A, your next interaction on this topic would be different than that if you chose to notify the family right out of the gate. But it's also great because, if you have different participants going through the same inbox, they can have different and unique experiences. But now that we've kind of done a couple practical examples and we've described what an inbox simulation is, let's go ahead and summarize some of the key benefits here. And first off is that with inbox simulations, you're immersing learners in authentic real world experiences. And as when we talk about some of our success stories, you're going to see how we actually did that in fictionalized versions of their own company. But by immersing them in these real world experiences, they complete it, then you're getting empirical data on their soft skill development. And we'll show you that in a moment as well. But at the same time, as soon as they get while you're receiving that empirical data, the learner is getting instantaneous and individualized feedback. That way, again, we can bridge that knowing doing gap to start, but then improve our likelihood of learning transferring. And then even after you get that feedback, what do you do with it? Well, it'll give you and the learner all of the tools you need to create an action plan. That way you can develop those skills that are in need for improvement. And then how do you exactly evaluate how well their efforts were at improving their skills? Well, you can have them go through one of these inbox simulations again to catalog that development longitudinally over time. And really what I'm delighted to do now is kind of shift gears here and share with you how those 5 companies I alluded to at the start of the presentation have partnered with us, have come to us with different types of challenges that they were facing, and how those inbox simulations address them. And what these success stories will also demonstrate is not just the variety of ways that inbox simulations can be implemented, but also the unmatched ability to create custom simulations and assessments to assess the skills that matter most to your organization. And therefore, you're going to hear stories on how our clients implemented, say, our ready-to-use leadership development series that hits on key competencies like general business management competencies, supervisory competencies, even ethics and time management competencies. But you'll also hear how some of the more innovative companies out there are developing their own simulations in-house to meet their needs via our authoring platform, or where they partner with us directly to create a custom simulation in sometimes as short as a month and a half's time. So from everything from skill gap analysis to succession planning to measuring training impacts empirically, we're going to share with you again the L&D challenges that each of the companies on screen faced, how inboxes were implemented to address them, and then some of the key outcomes that we were able to achieve. And to start off, let's go ahead and take a look at Caterpillar and how they use inbox simulations to objectively measure soft skills, a bit more of a general case here. And as many of you know, Caterpillar is an Illinois-based construction manufacturing company, a global leader in not just the manufacturing, but also in the sale of construction equipment globally. And what Caterpillar sought to do was develop their sales capabilities of their different dealers across the globe on multiple continents. And to do so, they took part in Rutgers University's long-standing and globally recognized international executive education program. And the two partnered to create a phenomenal 10-month online training program, appropriately titled the Sales Management Certification. And while this program was already award-winning and had astounding success over the better part of a decade at the point they contacted us, they of course always want to strive to iterate and improve on their training initiatives, particularly with how they were assessing soft skills in many of their sales managers around the globe. And that's when in 2018, we partnered with some of the facilitators of this program to implement one of our ready-to-use CAPSIMInbox business management simulations that provided exactly the data they needed to objectively measure these skills. But I'm sure a lot of you out there are wondering, what kind of data were you providing? What are really the outputs of an inbox simulation? Well, let's take a look. Because as each learner completes, say, the CAPSIMInbox business management simulation, they're immediately provided with an individualized report that you see on screen, which really focuses on 4 primary areas of feedback. And really, first off, what we want to do is provide each individual with their overall performance by percentile to see where they stack up against other learners that have gone through the simulation. However, in this case, we weren't just providing comparison to other learners in Caterpillar's sales training program, but the world at large. That way they could see how they paired up against tens of thousands of others that have gone through the sim. And then from there, we provide them with a developmental index. And really what this speaks to is kind of like our practical examples. Were you able to pick the most proficient or the most effective response to a given situation? And then we compare that with the consistency of that proficiency throughout the exercise. And then from there, in the second half on the right side of the screen, this is where we drill down even further, where we really want to look at how perceived skill levels of the learner relate to reality. And the way that we do this is by presenting learners with a brief self-assessment just prior to going into the inbox simulation, where we ask them, relative to your peers, where would you place yourself on a percentile basis in, say, a skill like communication or problem solving or leadership capabilities. But what we ultimately end up doing with that information is we take those self ratings and we compare it directly to the percentile data within the simulation. That way we could provide this second half feedback here. And where it begins is with a self-awareness level gauge on a scale of 0 to 6, where higher scores can indicate that their perceived skills are very much close to reality, and where a lower score can indicate that there may be some over or underestimation going on. Again, relating back to our quick reference to Dunning-Kruger effect, when they may be overestimating their capabilities. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, probably the most common case we see these inbox utilizes is for a skill gap analysis, where we visualize where do they self-assess and where do the inbox percentile data place them at, so we can again highlight where are their key strengths, where are they really excelling at, and where would we kind of want to spend a little bit more time developing them on. Again, going back to our point of being able to accurately find the skill gaps. That way we're much more effective at fixing them. And as a result, Caterpillar and Rutgers were able to implement one of these short immersive skill gap simulations instantly. We had it ready to go right when they asked for it. And they were provided with all of this global percentile data on top of it for comparative purposes. And this is all very self-directed, very little to no admin involvement necessary with this. And in terms of outcomes, it allowed them to make it so their training initiatives were more impactful and help them accelerate development by knowing exactly the areas they need to focus on right as soon as a learner walks through the door. And now that we've kind of taken a look at how inbox simulations can objectively measure key skills, let's take this one step further. And let's explore how this data can be applied to succession planning as well. And to do so, we'll take a look at how we're aiding the Kansas-based transportation holding company, Yellow Corporation. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Yellow, as they've been responsible for moving an incredible amount of industrial, commercial, and retail goods all across North America. It's hard not to spot one of their freight trucks all over the continent. And in order to excel at such a massive scale, they rely on thousands of operations managers across multiple countries to keep things moving and arriving on time. So in fact, it was actually Yellow who approached us at the on-site ATE conference in Salt Lake City back in 2021. And they were specifically looking for a scalable and immersive way to assess incoming first-level operations managers. More specifically, they were looking for a way to evaluate skills in employees that have just been hired, just like Caterpillar, they wanted to identify where they can improve, but they also wanted to identify high potential employees to fast track their development as soon as they were brought on board. But unlike our last success story with Caterpillar, Yellow needed something a bit more custom. So we partnered with their talent acquisition and talent enablement teams to train them how to build their very own custom inbox simulations in no time at all. And we'll speak a little bit more to the custom side of things in just a moment. But the main thing I'd like to demonstrate here is that through this kind of custom by client approach, Yellow was able to identify these emerging leaders quickly and efficiently. And so far, you've seen how feedback is provided to the learner in an inbox simulation, but here you can see how Yellow can evaluate dozens of clients simultaneously via a single dashboard. They simply provide a unique hyperlink to a new hire as one of their day one tasks. The employee completes the assessment, and Yellow's training team is provided with the results in real time. And what you're seeing here is a look at the administrative dashboard of an inbox sim, where you'll find both cohort level and individual level data. And for Yellow, they really focused on two key areas here, starting with that bottom red square, where they were able to see the overall percentile score of each participant that goes through this custom experience. And in this case, again, contrary to Caterpillar, they were only being compared with other newly hired employees. And then at the top of the screen there, you'll see that we're able to give a group's, the given group's overall performance at the cohort level. Say, if we want to look at new hires brought in August of 2022. And to see how they compare with aggregate data from former groups is the goal here, because that way in the future, Yellow is going to be able to see if certain hiring initiatives were more successful at bringing in high potentials. And before we kind of get to the benefits and outcomes you see on screen here, just to kind of go back to a previous point, again, context of learning is key, right? With Yellow deciding to make a custom inbox simulation that mirrors a day in the life of their operations managers, they not only can assess new employees at scale and get some great data behind it, but think about it from the participant side, from the learner side. They get a more meaningful experience while also getting nuanced exposure to the very scenarios that they are most certainly going to face in that role. And the way that we do this is by simply working with internal subject matter experts at companies, in this case, with current seasoned operations managers. And with that, the Yellow team was able to create this assessment in just a few hours' time by basing their content on the real world challenges that their operations managers face every single day. And as a result, they now have a custom day one assessment for new staff that measures the exact skills that matter most. New hires are getting that more meaningful experience, and the results are helping them prioritize further trainings while identifying the next generation of leadership at Yellow. And now what I'd like to do now is kind of stay in the same vein of custom inbox simulations that can be created, but this time show you how easy it is to modify existing materials into these immersive experiences. And to do so, I'd like to share with you all how S&P Global Market Intelligence was able to reinforce learning with these authentic day-in-the-job experiences. And really, with S&P Global, they're quite the fascinating company, particularly with the work they're doing at Market Intelligence, where they've created this fascinating data analytics platform that provides real-time financial intelligence data for clients all across the spectrum: academic, corporate, government, research, you name it. It's called Capital IQ. And being quite the robust platform, they wanted to ensure that leaders using this platform for their own decisions that they were making based on that data had an efficient way to learn everything that the platform could do. So certifying one's proficiency in capital IQ was a top priority for S&P. And in the past, they were just primarily relying on, kind of standard click-through trainings, kind of knowledge checks, if you will, that let's just say aren't the most engaging. And they also wanted to speed up the process of certifying individuals. So 2 years ago, we partnered and simply modified their existing certification assessments into an immersive inbox narrative, where participants that now take the role of a junior analyst. They're actively still navigating the Capital IQ platform and pulling data from it, and then applying that data in real world context in an inbox simulation. And since we were modifying existing materials, we were able to do this incredibly fast. But it didn't stop there, as we wanted the experience to have the same look and feel as S&P's platform. So we developed the ability for them to add their logo, to add their colors, to make the simulation truly theirs. And here's where you can see a look at how that looks in both the onboarding side and the live simulation experience. And basically, upon completion above a certain percentage threshold, we can provide participants with instant certificates, or if they didn't hit that threshold, they have the opportunity to go through it again. So as a result, S&P was able to simply modify the great resources they already had into this custom simulation that interacts directly with their proprietary platform. And thus, they're not only to make certification more accessible and more immersive, but to streamline the process as well. And this has led to higher engagement, higher fidelity examples of how the data in their platform can be utilized to drive real-world decision-making. And they're now saving a lot of time by automating that process. So we've gone through 3 of the 5 success stories so far. We've talked about how Caterpillar has objectively measured soft skills, Yellow using it for succession planning, S&P with certification. And all these focus on just a single, implementation of an inbox simulation. But what if inbox simulations could empirically measure the impact of our training initiatives? Well, that's what I'm excited to share with you on our next case, because we did exactly that with Microsoft back in April, where they implemented inbox sims in a pre-test, post-test format. And as a company that really needs no introduction, Microsoft already knew firsthand the benefits to experiential learning here. But they had some specific challenges for us. They wanted to empirically measure skill development at the beginning and the end of a brand new journey to principal training community comprised of some of their highest ranking engineers who are ready to take the next step in their career. But there was one curveball. They wanted to do this entirely virtually, and the 60 participants were in 14 countries across 3 different continents. But with Inbox, it was an easy 1-2 step process. Because what we did was we were able to utilize our leadership development series of Inbox Sims to assess a multitude of core leadership skills like organizing, problem solving, and so on. And what we did was we simply had them complete the first Inbox Sim right at the beginning of the training community. And then what we'll do at this year's end is they're going to go through another Inbox simulation that measures the same skills as a post-test. And basically this will allow us to show the empirical longitudinal development over the course of the entire Journey to Principal program, from the individual level all the way up to the group level. And even for a company like Microsoft, this is something entirely new for them. But I'll let program lead and team manager Jim Chismar say it best, that he said that it's this ultimate validation of your training efforts to be able to say, here's where we were and here's where we are now. And he goes on to say that most of the training at Microsoft is technical, where you can easily see the change. But with inbox simulations, CAPSIMInbox specifically, you can see the results even when they're not technical and right in your face. And while this program is still ongoing, the results are already being seen because, again, these future leaders have already gotten an immediate skill gap analysis at the beginning of the program. We'll be able to quantify the development at the end of the program, but it doesn't stop there because we can continue to track their development should they want to go through inbox simulations at the next stages of their career. And this is all done by simply pinpointing where they're at now and then at that point in the future. But perhaps the biggest takeaway is that Jim and Microsoft are going to be able to take this data to infer where they can iterate on this program to make it even more successful in its second year. And so now you can see how you can immediately implement inbox sims with the leadership development series. But let's briefly speak to clients who maybe don't want to create their own simulations and just like to partner with us to create one for them. So for our final success story here, I want to share with you a story of where we're currently working with one of the world's largest military defense contractors to create a custom sim for them. And while we're excited to share the story with you, of course, we did de-identify our client for the purpose of today's session. And what this company was looking for really, what they were looking to achieve really demonstrates why the customization aspect of inbox sims are so important. Because they wanted a simulation that would be set directly in a fictionalized version of their company that specifically assessed employees' fundamental understandings of program management. And for the skills that they wanted to assess, these were pulled directly from long, well-established performance indicators that were already part of their program manager's annual review process. And because this company was so unique, we worked with every bit of half a dozen subject matter experts internally there to bring their real experiences to life in this simulation. And we were able to do this in all of 3 months' time. And the way that we did it was not too dissimilar from how S&P and Yellow did it, just a bit larger in scale. The entire solution was built on a SaaS-based no-code authoring platform that allows you to create these custom simulations yourself, and virtually everything is customizable, from the skills to the scenario to the role you want to assess, you name it. And again, with this company, we were simply taking real-world emails, de-identifying them as well, and using them for the basis of the assessment's content. And honestly, it's much more straightforward than you'd think, because all we needed were this kind of 4 main ingredients. We needed the skills or competencies they wanted to assess, the scenario or the background information that participants kind of need to have context and know what they're being assessed on. And then from there, we just generated a few fictionalized versions of internal and external stakeholders that would serve as the delivery method for the simulation stimuli. And then finally, we plugged all of it into our inbox authoring platform, and we were off to pilot testing from there. So as a result, this company was able to receive a 45-minute custom simulation assessment that assessed program managers at multiple different levels, entirely set within their company and developed in less than 3 months' time. And what they have now is a highly relevant experience, instant data on where their program managers excel, and they're now even considering modifying this into a hiring tool to bring on new employees into their organization. So, with the conclusion of our final success story here, we do move towards the close of today's presentation. But first, let's bring it home by addressing some of the challenges we started with, and kind of talk about why inbox simulations are so effective at developing these soft skills. And first, again, is that learning is that for learning to be effective, you need to immerse learners in these, again, real-world, authentic experiences that mirror their day-to-day life. And inbox simulations are a great vehicle for this because it's via an email platform that they use every day. And secondly, you can only improve what you can measure, and it has to be an accurate measurement as well. And inbox simulations can provide you with that empirical data necessary to identify those key strengths and to prioritize the improvement of specific skill areas. And just as important as the data is that you need to provide quality individual feedback to learners as soon as possible to increase that learning transfer. And after they have that feedback, that's where the creation of an action plan comes in. That way they can develop those skills that they need to improve on. And that's where inbox simulations can return after the fact to where you can repeat the assessment and catalog how successful their efforts were. So as a result, I really hope you all enjoyed today's presentation. But as we close, I would like to go one step further and give you all the chance to see the benefits of these inbox simulations firsthand. Therefore, what we'd like to do for you all today is to give you a chance to try our leadership development series completely risk-free for 30 days. This will include access to our business management simulation, our people management simulation, ethical decision-making, and time management simulations as well for you and your colleagues to experience. And additionally, we're happy to provide you all with access to our inbox authoring platform if you want to try your hand at building your own simulation, or we could always explore a partnership between us as well. All we ask is that we connect for a brief setup call to connect to see if you want to, or see how you'd like it structured, and then we connect at the end of the pilot. That way we can get your feedback. But the reason we're more than happy to do this is because we truly believe that once you see how inbox simulations can elevate your leadership training, you won't want to be without it. So we're happy to help in any way that we can, and we're going to get you up and running in no time at all. So if you'd like to take part, feel free to simply text inbox here in the chat, or you can scan this QR code if you'd like to connect with me. But as we mentioned, we will also be providing the slides of today's session. You can connect with me that way as well. But in closing, I would just like to again say thank you all very much for your time today. I would be happy to take questions at this time. And Jess, how are we looking in the chat?
Thank you, Matt. We have a couple questions for you. The first question comes from Nitin, and I'm sorry so much if I'm mispronouncing your name, but the question is, do you offer multilingual support such as Arabic?
Yes, so we can indeed do that. And in fact, the interesting thing with the authoring platform is if you're looking for something custom, we can support any type of language within that platform. So yes, indeed we do.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question comes from Ali. Have you worked with nonprofits or NGOs?
Yes, we have actually in the past. Yeah, so we would have some examples there that I can share. Yes.
Awesome, thank you. And then the other question, we have a couple more, is from Will. How are the percentages correct determined? In other words, how is the value assigned to, say, delegation or communication for each scenario?
It's an excellent question. So there's kind of two things at play here. First is that we do have empirical metrics on each of the different responses to stimuli. And a good way to think about this is we kind of have a grading scale based on the level of effectiveness. Say, for instance, the most effective one may be getting +5 towards communication, where a more neutral response would get no points and a detrimental response would get a -1 or 2, just as a vague example there. And then at the same time, we have those empirical metrics, and then we're also looking at the percentile data, right? So we always want to establish a large sample group to start. And then we're looking at the percentile performance on how people are performing in each of those areas. That's kind of a quick way to do it. But what I can also provide is we have a great technical synopsis that takes you through the methodology of how we exactly design this. That'll go a little bit more in depth than that. So.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Howie. How is the solution limited to business versus other non-business organizations?
That's a great question. So while we have seen a lot of focus on specific business-oriented areas, say like sales or customer relationship management or strategic thinking or marketing, for instance, we've seen this used in a variety of different areas. I mean, we've done custom projects on everything from, I mentioned healthcare administration, but more specific roles, not exactly just administration level. Also have seen this done in certain DEI contexts. I see a mention in the chat there. A lot of the times these are done custom as well. Really, the beauty of this type of assessment is that because it's an email platform, the potential is virtually endless. So it doesn't have to be strictly in a business context. I've even seen this used by those in education, even down to like the elementary school level to teach topics like history and math. So.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a few more questions for you, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
How do your results, this question comes from Krishna. How do your results stand up from a DEI perspective? Do you have an assessment for DEI?
So that's a great question. So that's where I can kind of refer back to our technical synopsis document that kind of talks about that methodology. But what I will say is on the DEI front, we do get a lot of requests around this, but we don't have one ready to go on that because this is typically something that's very specific for an organization where we typically go the custom route with that. But happy to explore that topic, absolutely.
All right. From Jason, does this platform work in tandem with an existing LMS or is it more of a standalone product? Excellent question, and a very, very common one we get as well. So we do indeed partner for LMS integration. We've actually done this with several of the major LMSs out there already, say Moodle, for instance. But usually it's just a quick kind of conversation between our IT teams. Right now, we're really putting an emphasis on SCORM integration and our API connection. So certainly doable. We see this done a lot of the time for single sign-on as well as data exporting as well. Awesome, thank you. And are these simulations usually bolted on to a learning journey or standalone? A bit of both actually. I mean, kind of referring back to Microsoft, we kind of see as bookends to a larger training program. But the nice thing is too, because they can be done asynchronous, because they are very much self-directed and require very little involvement from administrators, very commonly, I'd say more commonly, we see it as a standalone, I would say. Okay. Thank you. And then finally, what is your target organization? Small, medium, large? Oh, we want to be able to help everybody with this. And honestly, if I could put it in plain terms,
For a very long time, simulation-based learning has been seen as both time-consuming and incredibly costly. We at Capsim want to dispel that notion. I've worked with companies of less than 5 to 10 people creating their own simulations. And then, as we mentioned, we're working with organizations like Microsoft and S&P. This is applicable to everybody. We really want to break down the barriers to make it so this very unique form of experiential learning is accessible to everyone. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
And one last question for today is, do you ever allow for participants to explain their responses to understand their thought process?
I see that from Krishna. Yes, this is an excellent question. In fact, we can do written responses. Yes, and I would say here's a quick example of how that's done. We have them do maybe 2 to 3 multiple choice responses, again, varying levels of effectiveness, nuanced responses. That way we can still keep it scalable and have the results available instantaneously. But what we do to that point is at the end of that email thread, we'll have, say, a email from your manager that says, hey, I understand you did XYZ decision. I would love to understand your thought process behind that. Describe to me why. And it's kind of interesting because for a lot of learners, they kind of take a step back. They weren't expecting that, but they have full text capabilities to write out an email just as they would in Outlook or Gmail. And then that way you can evaluate that separately from the empirical metrics. Actually, it's via our administrative dashboard for each of the written responses you have. You're able to attribute a separate score and provide feedback there. So yes, indeed, you can.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for your time today. We're out of time. I want to thank all of our attendants for your participation and your engagement, and I want to thank our sponsor for today, Capsim.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
And this concludes today's webinar. We thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at webcast.td.org, and we will send our registrants an email tomorrow with this link. Please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts at webcast.td.org/events. Thanks again.